Sunday is the first stage of the Women's Tour de France, starting from the Eiffel Tower today in 1 week and 1,000 kilometers later, finishing in France near Germany and Switzerland. The relaunch marking a key moment in women's cycling. For more, let's speak to James Vecina. Hello to you, James. A 33-year hiatus, crowds gathering. There must be a lot of excitement for today's race.
A lot of excitement. You can hear it behind me just there. The crowds who've been gathering from early on and continue to come here. And pretty much the same layout as for the men's, has to be said, for this first stage in the women's Tour de France. Now we're standing, as you can see, right at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. What more iconic place could there be to begin a race to represent France better than that? 24 teams, 144 riders making their way from the Eiffel Tower along the River Seine and then towards the Tuileries Garden, where they'll go past, of course, that famous pyramid of the Louvre Museum before making their way up along the Champs-Élysées towards the Arc de Triomphe. One for the sprinters, but it's not going to be easy with, of course, that false flat all along the Champs-Élysées as they're set to make their way for this first stage. Plenty of sides, and again, whether you're into cycling or not, the Tour de France is always great to watch just because you get those great visuals if you're watching it, of course, on television. And if you want to explore Paris today from your living room, you can do exactly that. So the big question will be, of course, who is going to be winning that first stage win to get that first yellow jersey on the Tour de France Femmes, and then more crucially, who's going to be retaining it as they head towards the Planche des Belles Filles at the end of the week.
And James, this is a 33-year break from the Women's Tour de France, but in the meantime, there were other races for women, weren't there?
There have been other races, there have been other organisations for the Tour de France, but now they're back under the women's, under the Tour, under that banner of the Tour. So it's the first Tour de France Femmes taking place this time. And there have been other races, yes, and there's been other stage races too, but now we've got the two coming together. A stage race being, of course, the race taking place over several days. 8 stages for this first Tour de France Femmes taking place over the coming week. Now, of course, the main aim of all this is to try and get talking about the Tour de France Femmes. As to do that, well, they haven't waited for the men's to wrap up because they'll be wrapping up later on today, so they're starting before the men's finish. So the whole idea of getting things talked about, and of course we know how important sponsorships are for sports, but even more so in cycling, and they've managed to secure pretty much the same ones as for the men's, which is a massive leap for women's cycling. And of course, all this can be seen as role models as the cyclists being role models for girls and women who want to make their way into cycling perhaps one day. So a massive step forwards in that way. And for the Tour de France, of course, this has actually been quite a long time going because other tours have their versions for women. There's the Giro d'Italia that finished just recently. Marieke van Vleuten, who won that one and is one of the favourites, of course, to take the yellow jersey here in France. Whether she can do the two of them, we'll have to see about that because there's just very little time separating the two. Not much time, basically, to recover from the two. But a huge change for women's cycling. Mountain, gravel, flat, everything in there. Today there'll be 2 intermediate sprints in there as they make their way towards the Champs-Élysées, as the men will be wrapping up as well. So Paris, as will you know, and anyone else who might have tried to ride a bike in the city, isn't necessarily the most bike-friendly city in the world, but today it's definitely the centre of cycling. 2 races taking place in just one day.
Indeed, James. And on that note, the men's race wrapping up in a few hours, as you mentioned, in Mark's Jonas Vingegaard set to win it, isn't he?
Pretty much guaranteed. He's got a massive lead up there ahead with Pogačar. He gained that lead at the Col du Granon and has kept hold of the yellow jersey. Would be a first win for him, and he'd be taking the yellow jersey all the way back to where the Tour began this year over in Denmark.
All right, James, thank you very much. James Vecina reporting from under the Eiffel Tower ahead of the Women's Tour de France. That's it for this